Welcome back to Lab 6, Scale and Load Balance Your Architecture. I'm Richard Golson, and we're going to take a look at Task 2, Create a Load Balancer. Now, in this task, we create a target group first, and then we will create a load balancer that can balance the traffic across multiple EC2 instances and availability zones. So you can see here that we'll be launching this application load balancer, and it's really going to be placed in such a way that it's going to function from the public subnet, from both public subnets. So this creates a front end for our solution. So we'll be able to route all traffic to the application load balancer rather than routing it directly to the EC2 instances. And then the application load balancer will take care of sending the traffic or forwarding it onto the EC2 instances. So we'll see that a little bit later. Now, notice that in the navigation pane, we're going to jump over here to target groups, and the target groups themselves will define where to send traffic that comes into the load balancer. So that application load balancer is going to send traffic to, or can send traffic to multiple target groups based upon the URL of the incoming request. So whatever address or URL of the incoming request, that could tell the load balancer where to route that traffic. So we might have requests that go to mobile apps going to a different set of servers than to say our web applications. So in this case, our web application will just use one target group. So I've already selected create target group, and you can see that I'm on step 1 here. And let's take a look at the configuration. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that instances is selected. This is our target. So this is going to support the load balancing to the instances within the VPC that we'll be using. It's also going to facilitate the use of an auto scaling group, which we're going to see a little bit later on, which will help to manage and scale additional EC2 capacity. Now, down below here, you can see that we're going to select target group as or lab group is going to be our target group name. And then coming down here a little bit further, we'll skip all the other settings. You might want to take a look at those when you get to the lab. We're going to make sure that we select the lab VPC. So you can see that's the one we're selecting from there. And then we'll scroll down and hit the next button, and we're on the register targets. Now, if we already had our auto scaling group set up with the targets, then we could actually register those targets. But because we don't, and we do not want to use this web server 1, which we had used to create our custom AMI, that's not going to be our target. So we don't have any targets available. So at this stage, you can see that what we're going to do is click on the create target group button down at the bottom of the page. So we'll have a target group without any identified targets. So what we will see is that we do not have targets here. There's no healthy targets. There's no unhealthy targets. It's empty, all right? Later on, when we actually connect this to an autoscale group, we'll start seeing registered targets, which will be essentially the EC2 instances that we're going to clone from that AMI. So let's do our next step here. So if you take a look here, what we're going to do next is actually create the load balancer. So now that we have our target group, we can create the load balancer. Now there are several different types of load balancers. So let's go take a look at those. I'm going to select the load balancer link here, and then I can go ahead and click on the create load balancer, which I've already done. And you can see here, there are 3 types that are being displayed: application load balancer, network load balancer, and the gateway load balancer. And there's nice graphics here. We're going to use the application load balancer. We're going to select that one. This gives us a flexible set of features for applications for HTTP and HTTP traffic. And that's perfect for us. We're going to be using HTTP. In production, we'd be using HTTPS. So it's perfect for a web application. This operates at that HTTP request, the GET request level. And the application load balancers will provide some advanced routing capabilities if we need them. We won't for the lab. And it gives us visibility features targeted at our application architectures, including things like microservices and containers. So again, this is the one we're going to select. I've already clicked it. So if we come over here, you can see I've begun configuring it. So again, a reminder, this is distributing incoming HTTP and HTTPS traffic across multiple targets. These are going to be our EC2 instances. Ultimately, those are going to be launched in an auto scale group. We'll talk about that later. So you can see that we've already configured the name as described, Lab ELB. And then what we're going to do is ensure that we scroll down past all of this to our network mapping. So once again, we need to identify the VPC in which the application load balancer is going to reside. It's the lab VPC. And then we want to make sure that we map it to the two availability zones that are laid out in the diagram, availability zone A, availability zone B. You see I can selected those already. And then what I want to do is select both the public subnets. So again, this is where our application load balancer is going to be placed and the listeners that are part of the target. So the listeners are what are really listening for requests, and then they're going to forward those requests on to the identified targets in our target group. So we have those selected and we have both public subnets selected. Scrolling down a little bit further, you can see we need to configure for the security group. We have the web security group. The web security group is going to allow the appropriate type of traffic through. In this case, it's going to be allowing HTTP traffic from all sources. Let's take a look at that web security group. So what I'm going to do here is navigate over to, again, the EC2. And I didn't queue that up in advance, so we can go take a look at it here. So what we want to do is go to Network and Security, select our security groups, and there's that web security group. And when I select that, you can see that it's configured with inbound rules that are allowing secure shell and HTTP traffic. If this were production, I'd probably eliminate this inbound secure shell, or I would secure it by saying, hey, the source is my specific desktop or group of IP addresses. So we'll ignore that line there and just focus on this HTTP traffic being allowed in from, and that's port 80 from all sources. So this is everybody out on the internet. We're going to allow that traffic to reach our application load balancer, which is entirely appropriate for this. So let's bounce back over here and take a look. We've selected that. And then our next step is to identify the listener. And so for the listener, what we want is to identify that the HTTP port 80, which is appropriate because that's what we'll be directing this traffic towards, our EC2 instances that are going to be receiving traffic on HTTP port 80. We need to select a target group. Now we have just created that. So if I do not see it in the list, rather than creating a new target group, I need to identify that. So I will use my refresh button. And now when I click on the drop-down arrow, I should see that lab group that I created in a previous step. And other labs, or at the time you're creating the application load balancer, we could actually create the target group right during that process. But we're not doing that here. We've already got our target group set. And so at this stage, now that we've identified that target group, we can just scroll down, take a look at the last few items that are available. We could have a web application firewall. We could apply new tags for a load balancer. Here's our summary. So this looks appropriate. We've identified the two public subnets. We've identified the web security group that will secure traffic, preventing inappropriate traffic and allowing port 80, and in this case, port 22 traffic through as well. So if I needed to interact with the EC2 instances directly, and our listeners and routing is set up for HTTP 80. And so I'll just scroll down here and hit the create load balancer. And now you'll see that the load balancer is being provisioned right here. And I can review all of this and see that, yes, this is all set up correctly. And so you can see our listeners and roles. Now, if we take a look down here, we have some other options, items like network mapping, which gives us a bit more information about our networking configuration. Here's the resource map. So this is going to allow us to see that port 80 traffic forward to that target group we identified. Here's the target group, lab group. Currently no targets. You can refresh this. Let's go ahead and take a look at our target groups. And when I select this, you can see that we still do not have any identified targets because we have not attached this or attached an auto scale group to the target group. So we'll be doing that in our next step. So when we come back for task 3, we'll create the launch template and the auto scaling group. I'll see you then.